sure Heather gets enough time to cover her content. And
good evening, everyone. My name is Deepa Rao. I'm the current president of Neowit. Today we have Heather, and Swati will be introducing Heather tonight. Over to you, Swati.
Thank you, Deepa. I'm Swati Venkatraman, and I'm the VP of the Neowit for this year. And I'm very excited about the talk this evening because we are going to explore the exciting world of AI as a playground of innovation and business value creation. This talk will demystify AI technologies within hyperautomation, encouraging the attendees to experiment with tools like predictive analytics, RPA, and GenAI, and will help discover how these accessible technologies can drive efficiency, spark creativity, and open new opportunities in our organizations. And our guest speaker for the night is Heather Breezy. A very warm welcome to you, Heather. Heather is from Cleveland, Ohio, and has over 20 years of experience in IT. She is an IT director at Whitecap, a construction supply distributor, and leads the strategy for Gen AI and hyperautomation. Heather has been a leader in transforming technology strategy and operations across the enterprise. She builds and coaches strong, capable teams that provide excellent service and solutions within technology. Heather loves to help people find their purpose and achieve their goals by using their skills and making plans. She gave her first TED Talk at Indiana University in 2022, building resilience on the playground for their Playgrounds series. Heather is a speaker, a panelist, and a moderator in the technology and women in technology arenas. A very warm welcome to you, Heather, and over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all today. I'm really excited to share this exciting topic. For any of you who are already out there on the AI playground, I'm excited to be able to hear about what you all are doing as well. I think that there's such opportunity in this space, and let's get started. Oh, it says sharing's not turned on.
Deepa, do you have to... Is it working for you now, Heather?
Yeah, it's getting ready. Okay. Open that up. Switch screens here. All right. Now, do you guys have the main screen and not the presenter? Great. All right. So let's visit our new playground and start walking through what this looks like. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight are around our introduction to what AI and hyperautomation are, what those key areas are for experimentation in this space. How do we create the business value that our businesses and organizations want to see to be able to use the play that we're doing in that creation and innovation to actually either, save money or create money for our organizations, where they're already seeing some success stories in this space, where we also have challenges and opportunities like with any kind of technology, and then how can we get started with that experimentation? So let's talk about what it is briefly and what's going on in the industry. So for those that haven't been following it as closely, in November of 2022, the big change came, and it came with generative AI and OpenAI's ChatGPT. When they introduced their first GPT model that was, let's say to the general public, they had, this is version 3, people started to use it at a rate that we hadn't seen previously. In the first 5 days, they had 100,000 users. In 2 months' time, they had over 100 million users. So they haven't seen this kind of tech adoption, even with TikTok, It took 9 months to get to this level of adoption. To see that in 2 months was unprecedented. So think of the rest of 2003, what we saw across last year was that this was starting to get recognized, that this was more than just hype, and that there's so much more to this. And a lot of organizations started, one, exploring, and then other organizations in the higher tech area or software as a service space started to make investments in development. So this investment in development starts to offer to us services to then consume and expand that playground of what we have available to us outside of ChatGPT, but still leveraging that natural language processing, that neural network, and that deep learning through that large language model, where this training had gotten so deep and so wide that we can have actual interactions that really do feel like human to human, versus maybe the conversational AI of the past, where you have some of that interaction, but it's so task-based. It's trained on very specific sets of data. So think your Alexas or Siris and those types of interactions, and they can become very frustrating. And we see that switch with the GPT, and that was what became so exciting. And now that playground for innovation means that these generative AI chatbot opportunities are in the hands of each of us. I'm not a programmer. I didn't come out of an engineering school, computer sciences. I know enough coding to get by, back in the DOS days, some if-then statements, a little bit of scripting. But now I can use the interaction between myself and the technology to go even further than I have in the past. So this is even beyond what we've seen with low code, no code, which is part of that hyperautomation space, and being able to drag and drop information. But now we can use it with natural language processing. We can ask it questions, we can get code responses, and we can actually design products and programs using ChatGPT or similar product sets. So this is why AI is such a playground. There's this rapid advancement in accessibility. So many of these products that are out there today are free up to a certain point. So you can go out and play and try, experiment, and examine what the differences are between these products. And later on in our presentation, I'll take you through some of the resources that I use, and also share with you, some of the differences between them and why, you might want to choose one over the other. There's also diverse applications across industries. So while, I'm in the retail within construction supply, I came from manufacturing, and I think about how manufacturing uses this technology, and why automation has been so important in manufacturing organizations, and now being able to take that to the next level and start thinking about my product innovation and how I could maybe be using generative AI to then take that to the next level and think of that new novel creation that's available to me. Pharmaceutical and healthcare, it's starting to really drive differentiation, because there's such a wide set of data there that now you can take this very specific to your industry data, associate it with that large language model, and then start to produce some really interesting outcomes. And then that low barrier to entry for experimentation. As I said, so many of these tools are out there for free up to a certain point and usage level. So if you are like me, experimenting, testing, trying, and then you can say, I can build this POC, this, proof of concept, or this proof of value without a cost associated. And I can then tell you what it's going to take if we want to take this to the next level, and then add these additional features. So that makes it really interesting and exciting for us. So let's talk about what hyperautomation is, because the thing that I've recognized as I continue to lead our generative AI initiatives, and most recently took on additional responsibilities to look at automation in general, because there's so much fruit on the table, right? we talk about generative AI and all this potential, and, you know, think about the hype cycle. Yeah, it got really big and it's so exciting. But then it comes to like, what can I actually do with it? So as I went and started having conversations across my organization, what I came into, because people are like, oh, let's go do generative AI with this. And I was like, let's go back to talking about what problem we're having, what solution we're trying to bring to the organization, or what repeatable rules-based work I might have. And when we have that kind of consistent, repeatable work, then we might be talking about different things. Or if we're looking for insights so that I can make data-driven decisions, this is where we talk about predictive analytics. You might be talking about business intelligence and reporting, the workflow related. So your low code, no code platforms, your Power Platforms, Power Apps, Power BI on the business intelligence side. All of those opportunities don't have to be standalone. So even artificial intelligence, machine learning, in many organizations like ours, that's in the data sciences realm. So you've got people going out there and, you know, taking that problem that the business has raised and using our data to then go and figure out, you know, forecasting or predictively by the patterns that we see in our data, what information can I bring to bear? You know, it might be cross-sell, upsell. It could be user sentiment and churn. You know, just depends on the business segment that you're in and how you're looking at the data or what you're trying to do. It could be pricing, inventory, all of those kinds of things. And then with generative AI, now you've got that natural language processing, but it doesn't solve for everything, right? Because in some cases, I might not want new and novel creation. It might be an added expense. And then, you know, the cost of compute processing on top of that utilization that might not make sense for our organization. And maybe I go back a level toward the AI side and I say conversational AI is going to be good enough because I might be able to tie it into the value of the large language model without having the new novel creation. So I get to think about this in different ways. And this is where I'll, you know, encourage each of you as you're having conversations across your business, take them out of the technology space. Share absolutely, like what technology's out there, how you guys are using it, what's available to them. But also, we don't want them coming to us with a solution. We want them coming to us with, you know, the problems that they have today or the outcomes that they're trying to get to. And our job is to figure out which solutions are going to help us to do that. And sometimes it might be a variable on this. I might start with predictive analytics, or I might start with a report. And then I take the data behind that report and I go, you know what? I want to use that to forecast this next thing. Like I want to pull together multiple pieces of data or attributes to drive to this new outcome. So I talked a little bit about sentiment. So if I want to say that I'm having churn with customers, I might go and look at, you know, social media sentiment. I might go and look at reviews about my organization. I might go and look at the buying patterns and have those changed with my customers. Now I can start to plot what those things that seem to be that are associated with why a customer may leave us, and then make decisions around that. And then I might say, I want to take action with that. And I use robotic process automation. And I say, anytime this happens, or low code, no code, and I want to create a workflow that then kicks off an event that maybe it goes out to my Salesforce application or similar CRM that then tells the associated sales rep to go and take action on this. We believe that we might have a problem with this customer and they may be on the way out. So go and have a conversation, figure out what's going on, those kinds of things. But now we've provided them insights to have those conversations. And that's what gets me really excited. I'm so excited about just that, bringing all of these areas together, because now when we start taking hyperautomation and we start thinking about that business process and how it's being used, is it, you know, that robotic process? Is it AI? Is it machine learning? Or are we going to layer in that generative AI? We want to create something new. We want to create, and maybe what we're creating is that interaction. We want to use that natural language to be able to tie in these multiple attributes and give a guide. So think of a lot of the assistants today or chatbots or agents are using this technology to then take it to the next level, to be able to respond and react in real time in a natural language with our associates and our customers. And then that compounding value. So just what I talked about previously is that we can take any of these hyperautomation areas where we're moving that repeatable work to the machine, and then add that generative AI to create new content, to create new ways of interacting. And we get to have that more personalized interaction for ourselves and our customers. But there's also challenges. So if anybody's already working in this space, I'll say data readiness. And, I'm using readiness over cleanliness because I think that there's a difference. And, we want to be really clear on our language here, because I don't need everything clean. What I need is the subset of data that I need to be able to do this job at a level of readiness, meaning that it has the right attributes, that I have structured data where structured data is needed, and I understand my unstructured and how I want to use it and go and find it. Because even when I get to the next level, and I'll use the generative AI side of things, that IT infrastructure becomes a really big deal, because so often I'm going to be using this in the cloud, right? So there's a cost to this, regardless of whose system I'm using, whoever's LLM is in the back end, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Anthropic, any of them, you're paying for the use of that service. And then you're also then having to decide what is the data availability or accessibility. So are you making sure, like with Microsoft, one of the values of using that product is that I can use it with my Active Directory and my Enter ID, any of those kinds of configurations in the infrastructure, to then, continue to have that cascade down and protect my environment when I'm using it within the Microsoft platform. Now, when I move outside of Microsoft platform, or maybe I'm a Google organization and I'm using it, in Google or AWS, that same type of thing needs to be thought through. Is how are you going to traverse the infrastructure? How are you going to connect in these data points? What's your middleware? How are the APIs going to connect and interact here? All of those kinds of things. And then security. I'll say many of my conversations today happen not just, with the infrastructure team, but with our info security team and with our legal team, because when you're starting to talk about generative AI, there's a lot of risk here, right? Because it's so new. If you're following again in the news, there's been legal action already about right to use of content. The New York Times is suing OpenAI. There are artists suing for copyright, whether it is physical and graphical art or music, and similar. That's kind of the beauty and the heartache that's associated with this, and each organization has to figure out what their level of risk is. And I'll say some of the reason for us, starting with Microsoft, is that Microsoft has an indemnification around the right to use. So if there's a problem and they get sued, like OpenAI getting sued by the New York Times, Whitecap's not going to get sued because of it. So that was a Microsoft decision. They built it. This is how they use their training model, so on and so forth. So they're taking accountability. And that was a big deal in getting started, because that at least has one risk factor that's lessened, right? And the other side that I'll say that everybody should be looking at is, how is that LLM or training model using your data? So make sure that you're clear on what that is and how that is. And even if they're anonymizing your data, what data is being anonymized, what happens if it comes in contact with PII, so on and so forth, so that you're having a good understanding and making decisions alongside your legal teams and your info security leaders around how do we govern and control that within our environments. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper into generative AI. So if it's not something that you've paid much attention to, or you're kind of like, it's, in the hype cycle. So like, I'm kind of listening, but not, let's talk a little bit more about what it is. It's a branch of artificial intelligence. And what makes it different is that while similar to some artificial intelligence, it's using, patterns and algorithms for its learning. It was trained on a huge subset of data. So this huge subset of data is that learning model that can then continue to be enriched. And it doesn't just stop where, like, originally when they came out, I think they were at 2021 of August, of the data that they had consumed from the internet. That might not be a bit, valuable to you today. So even thinking to a lot of the models that are free still with ChatGPT, which uses 3.5, you may lose some of that value of current events. So if that's not important to you in the model that you're using, 3.5 could be very sufficient and reduces your cost exposure too. But if you need some of the newer features and you want some of the more real-time events, you might need to use 4.0, and that might change, the way that you're thinking about that model and what's important to you. All generative AI, what makes it different and really cool is that it's multimodal. So it's not just text as we've had before, or even just, text to image, text to voice that we've had. It's that novel content creation in all of these spaces and understanding both ways. And what they've learned is that when they use text and images together in that training, the level of consistency in it being able to correlate information goes up. So I always think about our, physical senses, our sight, our hearing, our touch, all of those kinds of things. When we bring those together, the more senses that we have, the more vibrant that response can be. But at the same time, if you take one of those senses away, you can often have a stronger, like if I don't hear, I may have stronger, sight or stronger touch. So think about like even that rebalancing that happens when you're using one over another. So similarly, not all LLMs are the same. If I'm looking for text to text, I can get that out of most LLMs. But if I want to get more into images or video, I might be choosing a very different model because I'm looking for different things. I'm looking for that graphical representation. I'm looking for a crisper image. And I may choose a different technology. And those technologies are always flip-flopping as to like who's on top. As we know, the Adobes of the world who've been in the image creation, they've already got a lot of this in place. So they're leveraging that AI that they had in their tools and systems to begin with, and now starting to layer in, how do I use it in these new ways with this generative AI in creation, and still continue to do the things that I've done really well, like my Photoshop, and even expand on that. And then how do we continue to recognize that the value in the generative side is really in that augmentation. It's really cool that it can do that novel content creation and create something new out of all the information that's ingested. And I think that that's what's so neat about each of us, because I think that's how so often we work. We've all had these experiences in our lives, and it's those experiences and these interactions that we have that create the way that we think, the way that we speak, the way that we move and act, and the culture that we bring into our families and into our workplaces. So similarly, we're going to work hand in hand with generative AI and use what it's really good at in augmenting the way that we work. So it gives us things that we may not have inherently. Like I always say, like, there's not another me at my organization. I don't have somebody that I can call up and bounce stuff off of, but I do have multitudes of AI companions that I can go out and have this conversation with, right? I can go and ask these questions of, I can go and dig deeper. And the other cool thing that that's come up as we use generative AI is that it reduces that barrier that people have to asking, the stupid question, right? And we don't feel like we have to hold those things back because generative AI is not judging you. And it's not thinking about, Heather didn't know this, or, Heather's asking this question, or, the way that Heather asked this, it was in such a way, or it made me feel a certain way. So I think that that's so interesting for us to even be able to break down those barriers. And it also creates another level of accessibility, right? So if I've got text to speech automatically built into these tool sets, and I'm visually impaired, I'm verbally impaired, English is my second language. Now I start to bridge those gaps, and even translation. So think about, Zoom and Teams today with Zoom's AI companion. I can do live translation. I could have closed captioning turned on right now, in this session, and people, if they weren't able to understand me, or they couldn't hear, they could see in real time what I'm saying. And there's transcription and so on and so forth. So it's really exciting to see all of these changes and what opportunities it affords to us. So this is one of my favorite slides. If we're already connected on LinkedIn, I've posted and shared this, but this is one of the ones that I use all the time when I'm talking to my business leaders about what this looks like. And it helps to really break down, like, don't just get stuck in generative AI. Let's think about, again, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, or the solution that I'm trying to build, or the outcome I'm trying to create. And let's start with, and this is where we, as IT people come in, is that we're going to understand the difference between these places and spaces, what the definition is of what this work is, and who in our organization is responsible for each of these different suites of tools. So for me today, my work this year began with just generative AI. I recently inherited RPA, and maybe in the future we'll take on the low code, no code. But the data sciences area and the business intelligence are owned in a different area of our organization. But myself and the data people and our data science and business intelligence, we all stay connected, because at the center of us is data, right? So we all care about what's happening in that space. And again, back to, if we are using the different components here, the work that they're doing today in any of those spaces might be work that I compound the value of in the future with generative AI, or I can offer to them that we can do low code, no code, or RPA to then automate that solution, or do a push versus a pull for any of our associates or customers. And then I also like to give examples, down at the bottom, because we can talk about like use cases, here's where it's, a dashboard versus, workflows, predictive analytics, content creation. But like, what does that look like? How do I start to translate that back into, what does it mean to you, business person? So it might mean sales and analytics reporting, if we're talking about report analytics. And it might mean order processing and automation for our warehousing and manufacturing people, or demand forecasting and inventory management. And then when we start talking about the now content creation, I work a lot with our marketing teams, because there's such value in thinking about, like, what could that content creation look like? How can we go across different segments? How can we personalize this out to our customers, and start thinking about how do we interact with them, or create this even hyper personalized view? Is, I know what you've been buying based on your buying patterns. Like, here's what I can then recommend. So I could be taking information that I might be learning from our data sciences side, and say, let's take that to the next level. Now I want to have an actual interaction, and then be proactive in this regard. What might that look like? And that's where, again, it starts to get really exciting, because I might start right here, because maybe today my level of maturity, or the value that I can get out of my data, is here. But then maybe I can push it out to people, and then maybe I can start to drive patterns, and I love the and then and the what if, right? That's where it gets, to be an opportunity for discussion. And hopefully we're getting our organizations to think about this. And it starts with us sharing the story of what we have today, and how we can help them to interact and get to value for their organization. So let's talk about that business value, because IT, think back to ITIL. everything that we do in IT is for the purpose of the business. We don't do IT for the sake of IT. We do it to enable our business partners to drive, the outcomes that we need, whether that's, customer facing, revenue generating, whatever that might be. So the first thing that we start with is that data-driven decision making. How are we enabling them to do that? Then we start looking at how do we run our business? Where are places that we have opportunities for cost reduction or efficiency? And this is that, repeatable process. Do we have consistency? Do we understand that? Like, are we looking at some of that foundational aspect and getting it into the place where we may have some opportunity for automation? And the other thing that I always share is don't worry if you're like, oh, only 60% of my process is consistent, repeatable. Great, 60% is awesome. Let's work on that 60% because we can take the 40% and then think about that rules-based might say that if this criteria is hit, I bounce that out to a human being, or it goes down a different pathway in the automation, and that's perfectly fine too. You can still get to value. It might not be 100% value, but 60% is better than zero today, right? All right, enhanced customer experiences. So what might that be? So I talked a little bit about personalization or hyper-personalization. This means that I can meet my customer where they are and start to, that predictive side is I might be able to make recommendations if I'm a product seller, as an example, to them about what they might do. Or even in the healthcare setting, maybe I can tell them, here's the available appointments, based on this doctor's availability and, the last time that you saw somebody and the next time that you need to be seen, all of those kinds of things, I can start to make that, connecting those pieces into automation and creating a better experience for our customers. And then new products and services. So today, think about, that novel creation, but also we could be thinking about just the iteration that we can do with it as that augmenter. So I can be doing brainstorming. I can be digging in deeper into something so that I'm starting to recognize maybe something that I don't have insight to today in my business, that it hasn't been something that we did. Like think about Henry Ford back in the day of, horses, and he thinks about automobiles. So how do we create that? Some of that is that we've got to have that spark, and I call it those aha moments, and I'm trying to create some of those aha moments, because if I walk you through these ideas, or if I tell you maybe what other industries are doing, you might go, oh, I hadn't really thought about it that way, or tell you a medical story, but then I can say, here's what medical's doing, and here's why I think that it matters to us, because if I think about how they're using that repeatable process to then find that pattern and then use that pattern to tell this story, how can I do that same thing here? And that's how we start to connect dots for people and, think about things in a different way. We start that creation and get that creative juice flowing so that we can get to that innovation. So let's talk a little bit about some of the success stories. And one of my favorite ones goes back to the white face test that Joy Buolamwini did when she was at MIT. She was working on facial recognition software, and she's a Black African woman, dark-skinned, and it wouldn't recognize her. So just so happened that one night she had on a face mask, which made her white, and tried that with the facial recognition, and the facial recognition software was able to recognize her. Now, this instance of having that experience allowed her to adjust her programming, but it also allowed her to see that when our programming and the algorithms and patterns that we're training on don't account for the differences that we have between people, then we lose out on the opportunity here. So, go back to, the early days of hand washing and automatic hand washing, is that depending on your skin color, it didn't recognize you because it couldn't tell the difference in the shadow and light. So think about seatbelts. So often women were getting killed in accidents because seatbelts were designed for men, but yet so often it's women who are transporting the children back and forth and often in the cars. But we weren't accounting for that change, to those patterns. So often women are missed in the midst of this story. And if any of you is following Sarah Blakely, I love what she's doing right now to continue to drive women as innovators and inventors, and doing a lot of work to help sponsor the opportunities for women to raise up the inventions because of these failings that we've had, that we don't have these opportunities for women, or that we miss women altogether in the testing of medication and vehicles and so on and so forth. And even back to Joy's facial recognition, they were trying to sell facial recognition software to police, what do you call them, like stations, departments, and they were going to use it to identify people that, kind of like we use like CCTV to match people to incidents that have happened. But again, they were finding that it was making matches incorrectly, with women, with people of color. And then we start getting the wrong people put away because it's using the technology inappropriately. It doesn't have the mapping appropriate for the different races that we have. And because of that, we had a huge risk. And she raised the flag on this and got it stopped. And I think that's what's so important, is that we can't remain quiet in this place of innovation and creation. We've got to be really thoughtful about the work that we're doing and how we're doing it, because there's some really cool stuff happening when we get into these various sectors. And I'll say where I'm most excited, even though I'm on the construction, supply, and retail, is really in what's happening in the pharmaceutical space and healthcare. Because as they're using this technology, think of that novel creation is that you can take that data and start looking differently at it. There was a protein, I want to say it's like protein 53, and they started to map out what this protein's uses were, and they're finding even more cases that they didn't think to be able to use it in, but because it can recognize different patterns, and then as it starts to see where these new patterns have emerged, it can connect new patterns, and then it goes out to the professionals to then go in and take the data and validate it through real life testing and ensure that those are real cases. And then you can see that whole mapping to say, like, here's what stage of inception this product is in. And that's so really exciting that we could create something new that we've never had before. And they're doing that same thing with batteries. So think about the chemical manufacturing side of things, and being able to look for other ways to produce this, lithium ion batteries in a safer way, a more disposable way, and leveraging generative AI to think through what might be the way that you do that. And again, you're training it on this new data of, let me add this other subset of information to help you better understand what we're talking about, plus, whatever the large language model is, bring this data together, and then start to incept in new ways that we hadn't thought of before. But I'll say the other thing that I learned that was really interesting is that sometimes the way that we invent is really human novel, right? One of the stories that was shared in one of the classes that I took was around the malaria drug, and that the doctor chemist who discovered this malaria drug, it was a single line of text in an old Chinese scroll, and it talked about how this one plant was used for fever reduction, and she tied that one line from the scroll to her knowledge in pharmaceuticals and was able to pull those two pieces together. So think about, this large body of data, it's not going to pull out that outlier, right? So this is where, I always tell people, this is where our creativity, this is where our own thought, and this is where like we pull together information in a different way. I was telling somebody on a podcast that I did recently that, if you've ever seen the movie Working Girl, where she connects like 3 pieces of data, heard about this, company and what they were going through in print, and heard this other piece of data around radio, and that there was some trouble over there, and that this person was looking to do acquisitions, and she's like, wait a minute, here's the triangle, like these things intersect, we should make a deal and like put this together, and here's what that might look like. And that's how my brain works. And I said, like, I see those different pieces, and I'm like, oh, if you just did this. And he's like, that's your brain. He's like, not everybody's brain works like that. And I was like, oh yeah, that, like that's my superpower. Like that's one of the things that I'm really good at, is pulling in those disparate pieces and then saying, okay, I can see the bigger picture. And then how do I pull this down and take action against it? So that's what we have to think about, like as humans. This thing is not coming to take your job. This thing is coming to make you better and take away some of the stuff that maybe gets in the way of you being really good at your job because you're too busy and there's too much. So like, how can I offload stuff to be augmented, to be taken over by, to be summarized through generative AI, so that I can get to the high value that I can provide that's not kind of the noise side of things. And then the other really cool place is on the healthcare side, when we're talking about assessment. In the radiology space, they just talked about how they did a test around a large subset of X-ray data, and they evaluated it against junior level residents, and it outperformed a junior level resident and was like starting to ramp up to be closer to a higher level attending, but not quite a senior level radiologist. So that's where we have to, again, start to think about, here's where the value is, that I can get to that quick assessment on those common things, but I still need somebody who's got deep, rich knowledge to be able to talk about and look at when it's not in this pattern, when there's something that is, slightly off, that needs to be able to recognize those outlier situations and what that is and what to do about it. And it doesn't take away the diagnostician side of that then connects information back, but it can help in other areas, like, if you've ever gotten out of the ER, urgent care, and you have to call the nurse because one of the things that it said is like, if this happens, call this number, or you want to take a medication, that wasn't on your list, and you want to ask a question about it. So the AI can do those kinds of things without having to have a nurse do it. And that allows the nurses to be, back on the clinical side and working with the patient, and not having to answer these questions that could more easily be answered through a bot. And the bot sounds like a nurse and a human being and not a robot, right? So those are some of the things that are starting to change in the space. And then on the retail side, what I thought was really cool is that Walmart partnered with Microsoft, and they shared their use case and what they were doing in Azure AI. And they're creating a shopping experience that allows you to go in, and it doesn't just like today, where it recommends, based on my buying patterns or that of other people, it can actually say, tell me, like, my daughter's having a 3rd birthday party and she wants to have, pink unicorns. Help me to plan a 3-year-old's birthday party. And it can tell you the list of things that you would need for that party. So as a mom, my kids are all adult age now, but I remember those early days, trying to juggle work and little ones and all the things that came with that, and bake the cake and, get all the supplies needed and set up the party and send out the invites. And like what a big deal getting Evites was. You're like, oh my gosh, thank God, one less thing to do. But now here's Walmart saying, I want to help you to plan this party or the Super Bowl party. Maybe you're at this later part of life, and now you get to enjoy kinds of things instead of like baking cakes and, buying candles and, matching to whatever this year's exciting new toy is. And you're thinking about that other side of fun and planning, and Walmart's meeting you in the midst of that. And now Target too is heading down this path, and it's really exciting to read their story. So some of these big retailers rethinking how they're meeting their customer and how they're going to provide value back, leveraging this new technology is exciting. And again, I don't want to talk about like all the exciting stuff and be like, oh, nothing to worry about, because there are things to be concerned about. And when I say things to be concerned about, I just want us to walk in eyes wide open. And I don't want it to become this limiting, factor of why we don't do it, because there will always be fear, uncertainty, and doubt in, every new technology's introduction. And a lot of it has to do with, will I have a job at the end of this? Will this displace me? Will I have the skill set necessary? And then as we talk about generative AI, because it was trained on a large set of data, and that large set of data was created by all of the human beings in the world that are already biased, it is trained on the biases of all of us human beings. So recognize that that's the case, and there's training that's going on to try and reduce the incidence of that. But the other side of that is that when we reduce the incidence of this, and I was not thinking like this, what I'm about to share, until I was at an AI for Distributors conference recently, and a couple of the speakers talked about that we start to lose the value of novel content creation when we start to limit the way it's creating. And and I sit on that fence, right? Because I totally get the importance in training so that we reduce that incidence of bias. But at the same time, we do lose, there is the potential. I mean, go measure that. I mean, at the end of the day, could somebody measure that and say, did we actually lose that because we took bias away? Or did we create something totally new that we didn't have before? But I think that that's the beauty of us talking about these things, because we introduce that we all have different viewpoints and ways of looking at this that are valuable and need to be considered here. There's a woman who I follow on LinkedIn who is doing a lot on the career side, and she's teaching people how to write their resumes using generative AI. Her name's Kate Wade, so if you're interested in following her. But she's training one of her chatbot to be very female-centered and helping to reduce the bias by training on female language. So I thought that was really interesting too, is that we have an opportunity to leverage who we are and incorporate that into these bots and into the language in which we're training them in. And that's the excitement just continues to grow, right? Because there's so many opportunities and what ifs and if we's. And that's where we get to continue to play and continue to say, as I build this or as I do that, what could I do with it next? And, in IT, we have this continuous improvement mindset always, right? Especially if we've been in the software development side or, support, we're constantly thinking about like, we're never done. You might get to done with this piece of software or this delivery, but the overall product is continually evolving, just as we are. Like every time that we take something new in, we're evolving, because we've got to decide, are we accepting that and bringing that into who we are, or are we rejecting it and pushing it away from ourselves? So that same thing is true as we continue to think about what those challenges are and that role of diversity, because we want that fairness in the algorithmic training. We want to be able to see insights that traverse the body of our customer, and our customer is varied. I can't think of a single product that is only for men or for women or for this gender or for this race or this religion. because it can be used in other ways. Just because it was made in this way or this intention doesn't mean that that's how it's always going to be used. Think about boxer shorts. And maybe this isn't a 90s kid thing, but like boxer shorts made for men, you know, girls were going around wearing boxer shorts to bed, right? Like, just because it's created for one, you know, reason or purpose doesn't mean that that will always be the way that it's used. Again, it evolves, and it's here to meet a need. So we talked about some of these challenges, but let's go a little bit deeper from the IT perspective on this. And we've got to think about that integration with our existing systems. If we're going to put a bot that, let's say, works in Teams or Slack or, you know, whatever, and is that agent then so that your associates can interact, then we've got to think about how we're tying it in. You know, is that a platform that they're using today? Are we meeting them where they are? We've talked a lot about the data quality and governance. We've got to continue to have those conversations and thinking about that data readiness and how we're governing and what we're governing, because the type of data and the readiness of it, and also with readiness, let's say where it sits in the bucket. You know, is it active data versus archive data? In, you know, which subset is it sitting in within our organization? How often is it used? And even when we're making a decision around the AI that we're using, whether it's conversational or generative, we've got to be thinking about how we want to use that data. So again, do I want that creation and I need that side of it, so I want to go generative, or do I want that consistency? And to get that consistency where I don't want creation, I may want just conversational AI. And I want to think about that those differences are really important, and we want to be intentional when we choose that. This is a big one. And when I was at the AI conference last month, one of the things that a lot of the organizations are talking about is that as we get into focusing around like moving work toward automation, AI, is that we've got to identify what those skills are for our workers. We've got to hire the talented workers, or we've got to upskill the talent that we have today, because we may not have the readiness for the types of technologies that we want to employ or this new way of working. And, you know, if you've been through digital transformation previously, one of the big things that I hope you've done, or, you know, have learned from that, is that when we introduce a new way of working, that means that some of the jobs and skills that a person had previously may no longer be used. So I talk about this whole job transformation. Today, your job and skill may look like this. And then tomorrow, when we automate some of these pieces of that responsibility of your job and skill will look like this. And there's this gap in between stuff that I no longer need and things that I will now require. So how do I bridge that gap between where my employees are today and filling that gap? And some of it may be they have that skill already. We're just not using it in their role today. Great. So what are those skills? And then what's my gap? And then how do I fill that? Do I, you know, am I bringing in training? Do I have, you know, LinkedIn Learning or similar available to my team members? You know, can I send them out for this training? Are they doing it on their own? Like, what does that look like? Because our work is going to continue to evolve, because technology is continuing to evolve. And all of us have been in IT long enough that we've seen, especially these last 10 years, this change rate and acceleration of change has been out of this world, like nothing we've ever seen before. And I find it extremely exciting, but I understand the other side of it too, which is that this can be very daunting if you've done the same thing for most of your career. And now this new way of working is feeling threatening to that, because you don't know if you're going to like the way to work in this new pattern. You don't know that if you're going to have the skill set or the desire to work in this new way. And what does that mean for you? And I want to recognize that, because That's a big deal for me. A lot of the time when I'm going in and talking to other areas of the business and they send in questions in advance, there's always questions about, are you going to eliminate my job? And I can't answer that question because I don't know. But what I do know is that your job will transform. I don't know if you will transform with it. I don't know if you will have the capacity, the capability, the desire to transform with it. But what I want to offer to you is that if you learn with the technology, if you let the technology come alongside you, you have much more opportunity to make this a successful transition. I'm going to skip through some of these and get down to where we are, is that I want to leave you guys with tools and platforms for beginners, some resources and learning, and some importance of ethical considerations. So I have a whole host of different tool sets that I'm using that I find invaluable in my work. And depending on what's available at your organizations and what may be blocked or what you're using at home, I would recommend trying each of these out. And I'll share this with you, Deepa, so that you can, share with the rest of the organization, at least this last part. And then here's some of the things that I have used to deepen my education around generative AI and automation. We're using Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft did a good job with their adoption guide, so I send your people out to use that. It has it based on user persona, so you can have your salespeople use it from the sales perspective, accounting, so on and so forth. They have prompts that are available through Copilot's lab, so you can get in there and try some different things out, learn how to learn the language of prompting, all those kinds of things. Microsoft Learn, tons of great opportunity and learning in that space. If your company has LinkedIn Learning like mine does, I highly recommend Dave Bursa's training. He's done a lot of stuff on the creativity side, on prompt language and generative AI. I love his style. I love the exercises that he does. That's why I'm a huge advocate of the stuff that he does there. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll see all the stuff that I've posted and shared around other LinkedIn learning that I've done. And then the other one that I'm finding really valuable is with Google Cloud. And they have an Intro to Generative AI course, and it's got a number of different pieces to it and tons more training that's part of the Google Cloud path. But if you want to learn about generative AI and using Gemini and the DeepMind tool set with Google, I would highly recommend that as well. And then as we continue to talk about, in order to be successful, we've got to continue to have ethical considerations. Make sure that we're interacting with and prompting all these bots with thought and care, because we are training it still as we move forward with the way that we're interacting. So be courteous, be thoughtful, and inject good. And my call to action to each of you is go and dive in, go and experiment, go and create your playgrounds. Play every day, whatever's available to you at work. Like if you're a Microsoft organization, you've got Copilot in Edge or Bing, use that and, allow it to augment the work that you're doing. And then you can connect with me here.
Thank you so much, Heather. This was great.
This
is amazing. Heather, I do have a few questions. I work for Signet. We are a specialty retailer, jewelry retailer, and I now realize that much of what we call Gen AI is not Gen AI. It's either hyperautomation or it is AI ML, right?
Yeah.
So we are still very early in the AI ML journey.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing, and you have touched on it, but I would want to know more, right? One thing that we are observing is the quality of our data,
Mm-hmm.
how poor data can result in poor outcomes, right? And I don't think we invested enough time in cleaning up our data, making sure that our data is good prior to jumping into this AI journey. So do you see this with companies typically, and how do companies go about solving this issue?
Yeah, I think that this is the biggest problem that most organizations are facing today, and especially in the retail and distribution space, because we have so much data, and that's like the good and the bad side. Because with so much data, you can get to a lot of good insights, almost. Because this is where, like, this is the whole like structured, unstructured.
Yeah.
Are you in a data warehouse at like how is it distributed? How is it accessible? And that's where we really have to think about like what we're trying to do. And that's why I keep saying, like, let's not boil the whole ocean. Let's not clean everything. Let's focus on what really matters. And I'll say the other conversation that I often have with my business is, can we talk about like what's the highest value work?
Yeah.
So let's go and say, if instead of deal with like every bit of the products that we sell, let's focus on, go back to Pareto, right? So what is the 20% of our data that drives 80% of our revenue? Or like name your numbers, whatever that ratio is that you want to be able to get to, and then say, what are the insights that I'm going to need? And then let's associate those attributes. And this is where we get down to like, I want to focus on readiness, so that I can say it's this subset of data for these product sets, for this segment of our business, like whatever it might be to start. And then like break it down, like create that journey and roadmap for your data too. Like I want to get this data ready first, because if I can start driving that part, and I can get that flywheel going, now I've got so much opportunity to then like go deeper in this subset while I go and I work on that next subset of readiness. And then you can keep going layer by layer. And this is where it comes back to, I need good governance, because now that I've delivered this, I don't want to have to go back and touch that again. So I've got to be thinking about like, how do I maintain that readiness that I got to get to that good outcome?
Yep. Yeah, it's great points.
Yeah.
I had one more question, Heather, and then I will open it up to Deepa and Nitya. So I was at the Gartner Symposium earlier this year, and of course, AI was the topic of the season.
Right.
And many companies spoke about how stakeholder anxiety is a big factor for non-adoption, right? You go through this entire project, you invest money, you invest time. And at the time of go live, right, the business gets anxious because they are not sure if the outcome is going to work counterintuitively. So how can business stakeholders test the waters, right, prior to committing to it fully? Because we are trying a few AI projects on our side. So one big item that we are doing is how can we use data, AI, ML to get better at giving order arrival dates. So we are a gifting company, right? So when the the arrival dates of orders is a big factor that determines when the customers are buying. So to be able to be more precise is very important. But historically, all the calculation of arrival dates has been rule-based, and we are moving to using data and predictive analysis. But there's a lot of anxiety among the business stakeholders for adoption. So just want to get some ideas on how to navigate that.
Yeah, so that's something that we're doing as well, because at the end of the day, when you sell a product, the customer wants to know, when will that product arrive, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking at that same pattern as like, can we get to the point that we can guarantee that it'll be delivered in this certain time frame? And I was talking to one of our ops leaders, and we talked about like, can we get to concentric circles? Maybe we can do it within a certain delivery radius and be able to talk about it from that perspective. So let's go and figure out, like, again, you're going to have to go back to your data and say, based on this concentric circle, and who are my customers that fall into this, what was my
What's the data
time frames I was able to deliver that in. And then this is the whole, like, I got to track back, like, this thing that I want to do, is it realistic? If we
Mhm.
go back to the SMART, again, we set this goal, is this realistic? Is it time bound? Is it, what are those things that we want it to be? Can we get there?
Yeah.
And again, like maybe it's bite-sized chunks of what can we do, and maybe we start with metro areas, and then you can go out further. And some of that we have to think about, like, what is our agreement to our customers,
Right.
and then what do we want it to be, and what can we hold ourselves accountable to? Because there's a cost to all of it. Like, we've got to choose like what that means to us and to our customers too.
Makes sense. Thanks, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
And Nitya, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I know you talked about mostly about how the medical field will and healthcare will be affected. And I was wondering, I'm interested in going in the medical field. So I was wondering about how I can apply AI technology. And I recently started coding Java as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think the healthcare profession will be affected by security wise? Because what I've noticed so far is personal information is very secure so far between communication between humans. How do you think AI will take a turn on that?
Yeah, so this is a big deal. So we, on the retail side, we talk about our PII. On the medical side, they're talking about HIPAA, and HIPAA is very seriously, not that PII is not serious. It's serious, like more serious when you're talking about people's credit and their, that kind of data. But when we talk about people's medical data, this is where it's getting a little bit more anxiety ridden. To date, all the work that they've done has been on anonymized data. So there's no PII associated with it. It might say a female of a certain age, with these factors, it might tell you, they're African-American or Asian or whatever else, because you need those data attributes to then tie those patterns across. And that anonymization is where I think people get a little bit nervous, because they don't trust that you're doing the right thing or that their data is really secure. So I think that's going to be a big thing that healthcare and even the pharmaceutical, because if they're using, even when they go through their test phases for their new medication, it's just like doing a blind or a double blind study. You want to make sure that you have the right protocols in place. So some of this is we're going to have to build some trust in order to have those good outcomes. But this is already happening in the medical space, and they're using, like, the cases that I talked about are real life cases based on hospital records. And now more and more hospitals, and I'll say we're really lucky here in Cleveland, because the Cleveland Clinic's using Epic, UH just turned to Epic. I think SumaCare is Epic. So we have a lot of Epic related systems for that electronic medical record, and they're sharing across health systems too. So we have access to our own medical records. And I hope that we also see the benefit side of this, that our medical records, anonymized, can help make better diagnostic decisions in the future. And I want that. But what I've read says that in the future, as we move toward this, you'll be able to opt in or opt out for that, and for them to use your data or not use your data. And then they'll tell you about that risk and like whatever the anonymization is and blah, blah, blah. And the thing that I'll always tell anybody is, because we don't have regulations yet here in the United States, go look at GDPR and some of the stuff that they're doing there. And that came up at our conference as well, is that GDPR can be a little bit too restrictive. But I think that some of the things that it has in place, like that you have to be able to say, if I denied you a loan, why I denied you a loan. If I was using this for diagnostics on your medical record, that you're not denying care for me based on, what this says. So like, we want those kinds of protections, and we've got to think about both sides. Like, I want you to use the data for good. And this is the whole like ethical side of it again. So I want you to use that data. I want us to have this data and to use it for good so that we can benefit others, so that we can get to better diagnostics, so that we can look at women's data for once, you know, and start to say, like, here's patterns for women or women of color, or, you know, women in this subset or from this area of the world. I want to know those kinds of things so that we can treat them right, so that we can get to better outcomes. But we have to be able to trust that in the hands of the right people, the right things are being done, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for answering the question.
Yeah. And go out and look, there's some really cool, and let me just share with you this, because this is the thing that I've gotten the most good out of with our teams is, let me close that. So here's all the different, this is Copilot. So because I'm an M365, that means that my productivity suite is tied into Copilot. So I can search on work, and that uses Microsoft Graph. And so it ties into my OneDrive, it ties into, you know, everything that's happening in our environment, our SharePoint, so on and so forth. It remembers all of the questions that I've asked it. On the web side, which goes out to the World Wide Web, it's not connected to my Whitecap in anything other than to say that I'm able to use it in association with my work computer. So I can ask it any kind of question, and you see, just like you as a regular user, if you don't have M365, you get these 3 different ways that you can see it. Creative is when I want to do kind of that novel content creation. Maybe I want to write a short story. I want to tell some jokes. I want to create something fanciful. Balanced, this is what I use every day. If I choose precise, it takes a little bit longer because it's coming back with exacting measures in the way that it responds. Then I use Claude, and Claude is my favorite. And part of why it's my favorite is that I can go in and ask it any kinds of question, and then I can go deeper with it. So I was talking to recruiting about tech roles. So how are you sourcing for online platforms? And this is like, how do I experiment? How do I show people that they can go and get value out of the product? This is, again, meeting the technology as an augmenter, as a collaborator, as an assistant. And this is how I use it most frequently. So I go think through these kinds of scenarios. How would our HR team get value out of generative AI? What might they be thinking about how to use it? They could write job descriptions. We could use it for identifying the types of candidates we might look for with these types of skill sets, or what types of job roles are associated with these types of skill sets. So things like that. And it can not only give me answers, but I can go in and be like, I don't like this answer, or like, can you take this one out and, you know, add something else instead of it? Or can you combine these 2 areas and give me a new answer for that? And that's what's so cool about these, is that I can have an actual conversation that doesn't end. So I, you know, was doing this days ago, but I can still come in and work right off of this and, you know, start up as if we were still having the conversation, because even though we've moved on to, you know, 12 other conversations, it has, you know, it holds its place here. And each of the tool sets will have, you know, different patterns of what it remembers or doesn't remember. And some of it you can set for yourself too. So I think Claude is either 30 or 60 days right now in their pattern of recognition. And then I can go up here and I can start a whole new one and go back to that. And you can see this is all free plan stuff. Gemini, similar to Copilot, it'll start with some ideation with you, and you can start new chats. It can remember the ones that I've had before. ChatGPT, and I know that so many people are ChatGPT people. it's probably the one that I use the least, that and Perplexity. I think they both have value. They're just not my preferences. So ChatGPT, similar, but I feel like I get a lot of ChatGPT because if you're using Copilot, it's using that back end, even though it's got, you know, a little bit of Microsoft difference. So I'm not a big user of this, but one of my team members who I work often with, he is a big ChatGPT person. He's always telling me about new stuff, and especially with 4.0 because he's a paid subscriber. So he gets a different level of things, and you'll see here. That's their latest one, and I'm not signed in here. And then Perplexity AI, which is the one that Kate Wade introduced me to, it's what a lot of people recognize as probably the best one if you're doing research related information. And again, it can remember, you know, things that I've looked at it before, and you know, you can start to dig in deeper. Like I said, okay, I'm a master data management analyst, and here's what I'm trying to do. So I was using this as an example with our master data team to do fuzzy matching. So I'm like, okay, let's walk through, like, what might that look like? And, you know, are you doing all of these steps? Are there steps maybe that it's exposed to you that you're not doing? So some of it is, you know, if you're being moved into a role that's maybe not as familiar to you, you have the opportunity to then go and better understand. And then you can go and have a conversation with your leader and say, here's some of the things that other people in this role are expected to do. Is that something that you're expecting me to do? Can we talk a little bit more about that? And you can go in armed with this information and able to have that conversation and, you know, better like dig into what that might look like, and then how would you take it to the next level? What else might you need to, you know, ask or know about this? And here's one of the reasons that this is such a good product for so many, is that it shares, it's that explainability, and it'll share with you where it got that information that it came up with. And that's what, you know, your footnotes are for, to be able to tell you which source that it went back to for that answer. And then if you want to just try, you know, create your own chatbot, you know, as I said earlier, I am not a programmer, but I get a newsletter and it said, hey, Dante AI, you know, easy to use, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, I wonder if I pull in a bunch of product data from a website, could I build something? And this is just like, I wanted to prove that the concept exists, that if I pulled in a bunch of data, I could prompt it using natural language and easily get to an answer. So I went in and I picked a concrete picker, and I just went out to quickcrete.com. I pulled in a bunch of safety data sheets and product data sheets and project sheets and other information that it had. And then I, you know, created this bot, and now I can go in and use this bot to query and get answers. So I can now go in and say, how do I pour a footer? Ta-da! And I built this. So let me tell you, like, how good that feels to be able to build something. This is like, when it's a playground, like there's no failure. I learn something every time. And, you know, when it doesn't work, then you can figure out, okay, why doesn't it work? You know, what's more about it? You know, I might say, what would I need to buy for building a footer? See? And I didn't even write it right, and it still knew what I wanted. And again, it automatically came up with these answers. I didn't train it in any way other than to add the documentation. This is training that's built into the training. So, you know, I've shared that with a couple of people at the conference I was at, just to say, like, you want to get started, like, you want to pull in SOP documentation or policies or whatever, make it easy for your associates to go and get answers. If this data, is data that, you're not worried about it, the Dante getting trained on, this was all publicly available. So I wasn't worried about any of that. When it comes to your data that may be more proprietary or that you don't want shared or training the model, then you may want to be picking a different solution like Microsoft or similar, where you have more controls, or like even ChatGPT, Gemini. When you get to the paid versions, you'll get different levels of security that are then more enterprise associated. Any other questions before we finish our time together?
I learned so much from our time together, Heather. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Heather. Yeah, this is very informative.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you, ladies. I appreciate you spending your evenings with me today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heather. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.